What's up, everybody? Matt Kajeski here, back again with the Stokastic channel. And today we are talking college football DFS ahead of the 2-game Friday night slate. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We're also brought to you today by PrizePicks. And if you've never heard of PrizePicks, phenomenal offer for you guys. But first, let me explain to you how to use PrizePicks. They're daily prop-based contests. There's no sharks, no optimizers, no mass entries. You create lineups with player props, and you can make lineups with up to 5 players where you win up to 10 extra entry fee. And better yet, you can also use cross-sport entries. We're talking about college football today. You can include those. You can combine them with NFL, with baseball, whatever it is you feel like you have an edge in. You can use those sports together in your lineups. And there is a phenomenal offer for you guys. You can click below to get a first match deposit bonus of up to $100. That link is in the video description below, or you can head to prizepicks.com or download the app to take advantage of that. You must make at least 2 picks in your PrizePicks lineups, but we'll be talking about some players you can potentially use today. So make sure to check them out. All right, everybody. And week 1, week 0 are behind us. So you know what that means. It is the return of the data sheet, formatted and available on stokastic.com. We're going to show it to you guys, but I want to explain a couple things at the top. There's a few differences, and some things aren't populated yet just because there's a 1-game sample. So for reference, we're going to kick this off with Louisville taking on UCF. At the top, you're going to see team statistics. There's the slate. Their plays per game and pass rates are from last year still. That is going to change after next week. Everything else is relevant to last week's stats. Offense, OL right here, that just means how many sacks a team allowed. DL means how many sacks a defensive line generated. Dashes means that a team played an FCS opponent, so they don't have a relevant sample yet. These will go away in the coming weeks. D, yards, this is per game. So Louisville allowed 242 yards in their first game. They also allowed 9.3 yards per pass attempt. They allowed 207 rushing yards, and they allowed 5.2 yards per rushing attempt. Again, that is Louisville's defensive stats. If you were looking at the UCF offense, that is how that would read. But diving into this game from a DFS perspective, -6.5 in favor of Central Florida. The total is 61.5. This is moving Louisville's direction a little bit. I've seen some 5.5s in some spots, but you have UCF as the clear favorite. UCF has the highest implied team total on this slate, but Louisville's still a decent implied team total themselves. And we're looking at a bounce-back game for Malik Cunningham, and he needs it. If they're going to win this game or be close, they need Malik Cunningham. This was a shootout last year. These teams already played. It was in the 70s in terms of total, the final score. But Cunningham is a value play at this point, coming off the bad game, 2 interceptions, 2 fumbles, one of which he lost. He only threw 22 times, 152 yards, and he rushed for 34 yards. Those are well below his season averages if you look what he did last year. This guy was above 200 yards passing on average. He was above 70 yards rushing on average. He rushed for 20 touchdowns on the ground. It's a tough matchup against UCF, and I personally think it's a little tougher than what Syracuse put on the field defensively. But Malik Cunningham is in a strong bounce-back spot. I think you can target him. And if you're playing things like cash, he's a strong price-adjusted play. In the backfield, they used a pseudo bell cow with Tyon Evans, the Tennessee transfer. He played a ton. He handled 56% of the running back opportunities, 13 carries, saw 1 target in the pass game, -3 yards receiving, but still, he was on the field a lot in the pass game. And that's not something we've seen from Louisville in recent seasons. They've used a lot of timeshares, but Tyon Evans seems to be ahead of Jawar Jordan, who had 4 carries himself, 1 target as well. That's definitely a situation where I'm going to be looking at in tournaments, potentially looking at Tyon Evans, even though he's an underdog. I think there's a pretty strong opportunity for him there. In the receiving game, unfortunately, Louisville didn't condense their opportunity as much as I had initially hoped, but I still think there's some potential targets here. First one, Tyler Hudson, the Central Arkansas transfer, 100% of the routes, he was extremely involved, and the price point isn't too difficult for Hudson, 6.4K. He also led the team with 9 targets, went over 100 receiving yards. He's the early favorite to be the wide receiver 1 here. That kind of came at the cost of Amari Huggins-Bruce, who played well in this game, 62 yards, but he only saw 3 targets. He only participated in 32% of the routes. that's going to need to increase for Amari Huggins-Bruce to consistently produce on the field. So I like Hudson at 6.4, but if Amari Huggins-Bruce at 5.3 is going to have a 33% route rate, I think I'm going to drop to some of the cheaper plays. D. Wiggins had a 77% route rate. Again, 3 targets for him into just 3 yards, so not the most involved, but that's a good route rate. Marshawn Ford, their tight end, he led their team in receiving last year. He's the Stone minimum, 71% route rate. I think Marshawn Ford is a pretty solid play. And even Braden Smith at the Stone min, he had a 52% route rate. All that's troubling for Amari Huggins-Bruce, but again, it's a week 1 sample. Bruce could be more involved next week, but that 33% route rate is concerning. To rank the plays here, it would be Hudson 1. Marshawn Ford is number 2 for me at the Stone minimum because he's involved as a tight end and doesn't face as many barriers in the pass game. Going to UCF, we'll scroll over here. Hopefully it's pretty easy for you guys to see. All right. Looks like it's formatted pretty well. We'll kick things off with John Reese Plumlee, the transfer from Ole Miss. 8,900 on DraftKings, 12K on FanDuel. This guy passed for nearly 300 yards, and he rushed for about 100 on the ground. And interestingly, with John Reese Plumlee, 11 designed rush attempts. These weren't coming via scrambles. This is a guy who clearly has a role in just the overall rushing attack of this game. And again, these are PFF stats. They're not always quite the same as the box score. Plumlee actually in the official box score threw for 308 yards and 4 scores and rushed for exactly 100. So just know that these are PFF numbers in the back end for the yardage totals. Reese Plumlee is going to be an excellent play, highest team total on the slate. Louisville gave up over 5 yards per carry against Syracuse in week 1 against another dual threat signal caller in Garrett Schrader. Reese Plumlee is an awesome play. At running back, Isaiah Bowser surprisingly handled a bell cow workload over Johnny Richardson. He had 25 touches, 22 carries, 3 targets. All of those came before the third quarter ended. This guy did not touch the ball in the fourth quarter. These are all pre-fourth quarter touches. That's an immense workload for Bowser. And no, he's not efficient. He averages 4 yards per carry in his career. But if Bowser is going to be getting 25 plus touches against the Louisville defense, allowing 5.2 yards per carry, a lot of red zone opportunities with this high implied team total, Bowser needs to be in consideration. Johnny Richardson wasn't as involved as I thought. Just 9 touches for Johnny Richardson, 5 carries, 4 targets. I still think he's probably the preferred pass catching back, like on clear third down situations. Richardson does profile as more of a scat back. He's a little bit smaller, sub 200 pounds. He's been way more efficient than Bowser in his career, and you can even see that in the yardage totals. 59 rushing yards for Richardson, whereas Bowser had 74. At some point, Richardson might be more involved, but now it's a large sample where that just hasn't happened. He's a GPP play. The receiving room is very condensed, which is something I like to see. Javon Baker, Ryan O'Keefe, and Kobe Hudson are the main 3 wide receivers in 3 receiver sets. Javon Baker had the best game, 9 targets, 84 yards receiving. He just didn't have the best route rate. When you look at the 3, his was actually the lowest to 70% route rate, whereas Kobe Hudson and Ryan O'Keefe were both at 87%. Ryan O'Keefe, last year's leading receiver on the team, finishes with 6 targets, 48 yards. He's completely fine. But the real value might be Kobe Hudson. Goes 1 target, no yards, only 4,900. Again, his route rate was the exact same as Ryan O'Keefe's. It was higher than Javon Baker's, and he was Auburn's leading receiver last year. This is a pretty strong bounce back spot for the Auburn transfer in Kobe Hudson. Again, they didn't pass the ball a ton in this offense. They're playing an FCS opponent, trying to get multiple players involved. I wouldn't be too worried with Hudson. He's following Malzahn over to UCF. Better days will be ahead. Tight end was a rotation, but if you are playing one of these guys, it would be Keymore Gamble for me. 4 targets, 77 receiving yards. Kobe Hudson is far more involved, and he's just 500 more, so that's the preferred play. But you want to play some GPP dart throws with the UCF offense, Gamble would be the guy for me. Going to our second game, we have Boise State taking on New Mexico. This is a 17-point spread in favor of Boise, a 46 total. So this is the less desirable game from a stacking perspective. But Boise State still has a 30.5 implied team total. That's second highest on the slate. New Mexico implied for just 13.5. Starting with quarterback, we saw Hank Bachmeier benched in week 1. He played on 6 drives. All of those drives either ended in a turnover or a 3 and out. He attempted 8 passes for 30 yards. He's not mobile. These are all concerns for DFS. And now with how well Taylon Green actually showed up in week 1, Taylon Green passed for 154 yards, just over 5 yards per attempt. So it's not like he was super efficient passing, but he's really mobile. 102 rushing yards, some scores on the ground. He offers a dynamic ability that Hank Bachmeier doesn't have. I'd watch this pre-game. If Taylon Green is taking reps with the first team, I think he's fine to play in DFS because of how cheap he is. They're not really telling us much coming out of Boise. There's a chance both play, but I would be watching the situation pre-game. Running back was actually similar to QB. George Halani starts the game. There are reports he's not coming off the field at any point unless he has to, but then he's just so bad that they get freshman Ashton Jeanty involved. George Halani, 13 carries, 9 yards rushing. Now, he made up for a little bit in the receiving game. He had 39 yards receiving on 4 targets. But Jeanty comes in and he outproduces Halani across the board. Jeanty rushes 4 times, 16 yards. It's not great, but it's still 4 yards per carry, whereas Halani was below 1 yard per carry. And then in the receiving game where Halani actually succeeded, he was still outshined by Jeanty. Jeanty, 6 targets. He turns that into 51 receiving yards. He actually led the team in receiving. This explosive freshman's going to be involved. It's hard to say how much, but you want to take shots in this backfield, in my opinion. Neither guy's expensive. Halani, 5,200, Jeanty, 49. They're 17-point favorites against an inept New Mexico defense. I'll be playing both of them and slightly favoring Jeanty after he showed a lot in week 1 as a true freshman. In the receiving game, we lost Austin Bolt to a season-ending injury, so now we have a lot of clarity on the pecking order of targets. Stephon Cobbs is 1, 9 targets. Latrell Caples, number 2, 7 targets. And Billy Bowens, 3, 4 targets. Now, the pricing does not reflect this. You have Cobbs, rightfully the most expensive, but Billy Bowens is second most expensive on DraftKings. Caples is actually cheaper, $4,400 compared to $4,700 for Bowens. Caples is just a straight up better play at a cheaper price. Doesn't make much sense. But for those of you that want to get even cheaper, tight end Riley Smith is nearly an every down player. He saw 5 targets himself, 29 receiving yards. That's comparable to most of the receivers in this past game. So Riley Smith, he could be a potential red zone option for a high implied team total here. Definitely think he's serviceable at 3,800. Going to our final team, it is New Mexico. They have Kansas transfer Miles Kendrick under center, passed for 170 yards. That was a career high for him. He's just facing a much stiffer test this week after beating up on an FCS opponent last week. He did throw 2 interceptions, which is a concern here, but Miles Kendrick, 40 rushing yards is also towards the ceiling. This guy has an average of 1.8 rushing yards per game. A lot of that because of his propensity to take sacks. He took 2 sacks in their most recent game as well. So Kendrick, he's far and away the least enticing quarterback play on this slate, but his mobility at least keeps him in play as a GPP option. The backfield was a complete timeshare. Sherrod White led the way, 15 touches, followed by Christian Washington with 9. Interestingly, they did use Luke Wysong, their receiver, a little bit in the backfield. Think of him as a poor man's Deebo Samuel. He had 6 carries, 3 targets in the pass game. He seems to be a priority talent-wise, and when they can't get him the ball in the pass game, he's going to line up in the backfield for a few plays here and there and handle some carries. So he's a factor here as well. Below that, not expecting too much out of Alexander and Hullaby. If you're taking shots here, Sherrod White is the most likely to handle a feature back workload. But again, I think this is a timeshare. Washington, just a flyer if you're looking for a min-price player. In the receiving game, you saw Jordan Porter, Austin Erickson, and Luke Wysong as the top 3 receivers. Jordan Porter, 5 targets, 54 yards. He's rightfully the most expensive option in this pass game at $5K, but I think you can find better options than him. He's still worthwhile in a GPP. Shouldn't be too owned. Erickson, he played the most routes, participated in the most routes. Still only saw 2 targets for 7 yards, so a lot of them were just of the wind sprinting variety. He is really cheap, so if you're looking for a 3,400 play or less, Erickson could be somebody you want to target, not 3,400 or less, 3,400 or in that range. And then Wysong, I think, is my favorite play among the receivers here just because of that involvement in the run game. Gives him a good floor, but he was also really efficient in the pass game. 3 targets, he turns it into 51 yards. That was just right behind Porter overall, which is pretty solid here. And then last but not least, you're going to see some combination of Tristan White, Elijah Green. They're going to mix in for like 25 to 35% of the routes. Neither of them heavily involved, but if you're just looking for pure dart throws in your large field tournaments, these could be guys to potentially look at. But that'll do it for us today. Let me know feedback on this format. I know a lot of you asked for the data sheet, so here it is. It's available on stokastic.com with our package for college football, so check that out. But otherwise, let me know in the comments section who you guys like on the Friday night DFS slate. You can also find me on Twitter. I'm at Matt_Gajeski. I'll make sure to get back to you guys in the comment section or on Twitter if you reach out. But otherwise, thank you for watching. Hit the thumbs up button on the way out, and we will see you again next time.